So welcome everybody from all around the world. My name is Scott Mathieson from working in Australia. I'm the founder, and I have two panelists here today who are MARA agents, registered agents for Australia. And we're here to talk to you about how you can move to Australia. I can see that we've got people from all over the world here today, which is fantastic. A lot of people from the UK, so good evening to you, and Ireland and Western Europe, but also people from the States and Asia. So it's always good to be talking to a global audience first thing in the morning. Now we are very passionate about this. We're very passionate about bringing people to Australia, and we've been doing this for over 20 years now. Working in Australia. It was founded in 2001. So before I go any further, I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panelists. Our first one is Nassim Lalehzari, who's in our Auckland office. She's a MARA agent. MARA stands for the Migration Agents Registration Authority. So it's very important that we're talking to people that are mandated by the Australian government to give advice. Nassim, if you could just say a few words and introduce yourself, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Nassim Lalehzari. I originally studied law in Australia and became a registered migration agent many years ago, when I joined working in. I'm based here in the Ponsonby office in Auckland, and over the years I've helped literally thousands of migrants make the move to Australia.
Literally thousands, and exactly that is correct, literally thousands. Sarah in Melbourne. Can you please say a few words about yourself and introduce yourself to the viewers, please?
Sure. So Sarah, I'm a Melbourne-born girl, but I've lived all over the world and currently have come home. So I previously was in Auckland with Nassim and Scott, and discovered the joy of helping people migrate while I was living there. So since then, I've helped not quite as many thousands, but maybe coming on to 1,000 people to migrate to Australia and to share this wonderful country with them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Obviously, we are in COVID times, and this has made things very interesting for people who are wanting to migrate. Today, we want to talk to you about a couple of visas which allows you to migrate to Australia without a job offer. And this is really different and really interesting because normally your job is tied to your visa. So in this instance, and specifically because of COVID, we think this is a really good way for those people that want to migrate to be able to start the process now. It's a unique visa, but it really works. So I think probably if we just get straight into the guts of what's actually happening now, because Sarah, you're based in Melbourne, you're based in Victoria, and Victoria's had quite a lot of problems with COVID. So what's actually happening at the borders right now, and what's the government's approach to the borders and quarantine?
Well, I think the whole world knows about our long 5-month lockdown, which was pretty painful, but it did the job. Right now, we've actually just come out of our third lockdown, which was 5 days. So the approach right now is just to be very cautious. We're letting people in who qualify, but you do have to hold PR or be a citizen at the moment to get in, unless there's an exemption for you. And so if we get a case, it shuts down quickly, very briefly, and we move on. And yeah, there's no cases in the community at the moment, so we're all feeling fantastic. It's a great place to be right now.
That's right. Yeah. Look, and I will make a point, a very strong point, that because wherever you might be, we understand that you may well be in lockdown and you may be frustrated and you may think, gosh, I'm going to get out of here and go to somewhere where it's COVID free. The immigration process is a massive process, and it does take a long time, up to a year, even more. And there's every chance that COVID may well be gone, or all the vaccines may have been implemented. And COVID is not a reason to move. It might be one of those reasons that accelerates your decision to move, but migration is a massive undertaking. It's a once in a lifetime undertaking, and it needs to be thought through in detail. and the reasons why. So, I think that's just a little bit of our experience is that people who want to migrate for other reasons other than, knee-jerk reactions. Nassim, in terms of the policy, what's happening right now, and what is this visa that we're talking about, where you can actually move to Australia and get PR, so permanent residence PR? That's what Sarah talked about. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure, Scott. So the most common way that was and still remains for migrants to make the move to Australia is basically skilled migrants. So you've got skills that have already been identified by the Australian government as being one that is in need, and you're the sort of person that they want to come and join the rest of the population to help contribute to the growth of the economy and the rest of society. So specifically, we're talking about the subclass 189 and then the subclass 190. And we'll probably also touch on the subclass 491, which is a regional based visa. So in all of these instances, the government's already identified and they've said, these specific skills are the ones that we want in Australia, and these are the places where we want these people with these skills to come and join us. And so as part of that, you get a nice shiny PR. It's not a sticker anymore, it's just an email attachment. But that's basically your entitlement to live and work in Australia indefinitely if you want to.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is that you have to be of a specific occupation. How long is this list? I mean, is it only for rocket scientists and astronauts?
No, it's quite a long list, and it does cover quite a few occupations. So you've got your traditional sort of engineering, health and construction roles, but you've also got things like teachers and oh my God, the list is actually really, really long.
Plumbers,
so long
diesel
that
mechanics.
into a document, it's taken a long time. You end up with multiple tabs. So different occupations will have different options within different parts of Australia.
Okay, so just to be clear, if you are this occupation, let's say a teacher, we'll use that as an example, and if you have a certain amount of experience plus a qualification, and then your health and your character and all those sort of things are all getting a tick, then there is every chance that you'll be able to migrate on this visa. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, with permanent residency.
Yes.
And then once you have your permanent residency, you can move to Australia and find your job because you've already got permanent residency.
Yes.
Okay, that's good to hear. So Sarah, Nassim talked about location. Depending on your location, I know that there are state-sponsored visas and there's federal-sponsored visas. Do you want to go into a little bit of detail around that for our viewers?
Sure. So the most well-known visa when people are looking at independent PR is the 189, which is the federally based one, and it's the shortest list. So as Nassim said, the list is quite long, and that's because there's 3 levels of lists. And the shortest list is the 189, which you can move once you get your PR, you can go anywhere in Australia. Then the next list down is what we call the Stossel, which has a greater number of occupations on it, but then you need to be sponsored by a state of Australia that is in need of that particular skill. So you are a little more tied in to going to a particular area. So that's the second level down, and then the third level down is what we call the 491, which has an even bigger list, but again, it's region based. And so, excuse me, you apply to a regional area, which means you get to live in some of our more beautiful spots that are a little less populated, and see some of the best of Australia while you're living there in regional areas. Yeah.
And how long are you tied to that visa? Let's say I apply for the Stossel and I get sponsored by South Australia, for example. I've got to move down to somewhere in South Australia, let's say Adelaide, beautiful city by the sea. How long am I committed on my visa to actually stay in South Australia?
That's 2 years or 3 years for regional, so 2 to 3 years, depending on the visa.
Okay.
Yep. So then you're free to, you have a little more freedom to go where you want. But by then you've probably set yourself up. You've got your friends. You've found your favourite winery just outside Adelaide. There, you know the beaches. It's It by then you're probably quite settled and happy to stay.
Yeah. Nassim, is that your experience that if people come down on a regional based or state sponsored visa, they tend to stay where they originally landed?
Yeah, look, some people will always decide that, they want a different seaside or, rural community that they want to join. But like anyone who's ever moved knows that moving can be hard. And so once you've actually settled somewhere, you realize that there's a lot to offer in the area that you are. You start to make connections. And so there's actually really no incentive to leave.
Yeah, right. Okay, so just to summarize and make sure that I'm clear about what you're saying, there's three main visas: the 189, which is the federal one, and that has a very short list of occupations, mainly in highly critical areas of need. And then there's the state sponsorship, the STOSL, which is a longer list. So it might be like, if I'm not on the first list, I might be on the second list. And then there's the 491, which is the third list, which is the regional. So can you explain that difference between state and regional? Because that sounds similar to me. Sarah,
so the difference between state and regional is just that state migration is based on the capital cities, and then regional is outside those capitals, where there's still some really big centres, regional centres, but there's also much smaller towns which are in desperate need of teachers often, or medical professionals. So you're moving out into those communities where you really do become part of the community, because they need you and they welcome you with open arms. So it's really a great opportunity to build a fabulous life.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're going to migrate, why not go the whole hog and massively change your life and move out of a city and into the regions? And yeah, I mean, that would be an amazing experience, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so getting down to the sort of the practicalities of it, I mean, I think most people here will be going, gosh, what about a job? What's going to happen about the job? Nassim, how does it actually work in practice for somebody who's been who's applied for a 189 visa? Can you just take us through that whole process, please? And what happens once they've actually got their residency, their permanent residency?
So just using the example of the secondary school teacher again.
Yep.
You're on the list, you're on the 189 list because you are in a shortage area. You don't need the job to get your visa. You've had your residence visa now, permanent residence visa now approved. The reason why you've been given this visa is because the government's quite confident that you'll be able to find a job in your occupation because of the need that they've already identified. Now, you could decide that you don't want to be a secondary school teacher anymore, and you want to look at primary school teaching or a different associated occupation. Or you could decide that you're going to do something completely different and you're going to set up your own company and you're going to provide consulting services or whatever it might be. But once you've got that visa approved, you've got normally up to a year to enter or activate your visa. And so that means that it's not that you have to get on a plane the very next day after your visa's been granted. So at the moment, it sounds like there's quite a few people who would like to do that, just given the circumstances what's happening around the world.
Okay, so once the visa has been granted, you've got 1 year to arrive in Australia for that visa to be activated.
Up to 1 year.
Up to 1 year, and then in terms of the job, you don't have to start the job straight away. You don't have to look. No, you just got to activate it. So you don't actually necessarily need the job as part of your visa requirements.
That's absolutely correct. So I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to.
The sun's in your eyes. Put the blind down. Yeah. Okay. No, that's okay. I'll talk to Sarah. Okay. So I guess then there's one other question that I have that I'm sure that some people's minds. What is the sponsorship? How does that work? Because I know, let's say we'll talk about South Australia and Adelaide again. How in reality, how does that work? The sponsorship, is it done on an individual basis? Do you apply? Can you just take us through that process?
Sure. So it is a further application. So there's the expression of interest puts you in the queue to the federal government. And if you say on there, I want to apply to a specific state, then you actually complete a secondary application to that state and they assess you on their criteria. As mentioned, they need people in certain professions. So if you're on their list, then they're going to have a good look at you. Make sure that you've got, say, the language skills. So there's generally a language test involved, unless you hold, say, a UK passport, or Ireland, a couple of others. And then there might be other criteria that you have to fulfill. They often want to have a statement of commitment. So saying, showing that you've done some research, you've looked up what Adelaide's like, you've checked out the photos of their beaches and so forth. No, they do expect you to do a little bit of research and find out a bit about Adelaide if that's where you're wanting to go, and write that you're committed to coming. So yeah, it's pretty simple if you've got the qualifications. That's the big thing.
And it's capped, isn't it, per year? Like there's 200 teachers for South Australia, for example. Is that correct?
That's right. They do have a cap on each profession. Yeah. So we do watch those caps really carefully and take that into consideration when we're looking at assessments and so forth.
Yeah, look, and I think that brings up another point, Nassim, doesn't it? Is that in our experience, 20 years of doing this, what we see, we kind of view immigration policy as like a lung that that expands and contracts. And there's times when it's actually kind of easy to migrate. Like 10 years ago, there was a visa in Australia called the 457, and literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people came to Australia on this 457 4-year temporary work visa and then upgraded to permanent residency. It was super, super, super popular, and so popular that incoming government went, no, we're going to can that, and they just stopped it overnight, pretty much. And so we're seeing in these COVID times that there's a lot of discussion around immigration, and across both Australia and New Zealand, policy is changing. Nassim, is now a good time, in your view, to look at immigration, to look at migrating to Australia? What's your opinion on that?
I think that it's always a good time to start preparing, because regardless of what's happening in the world, if moving to another country is something that you want to do, then you need to be starting now. Everything always takes longer than people expect. COVID has clearly made it longer for those that we were already working with to migrate. So for example, those that were trying to collect documentation from universities or other institutions, and suddenly those people are not providing those documents to them because they're also in lockdown, has stretched out the process. So I'm always of the opinion that it's always better to be prepared and to front foot as much of anything you want to do in life as possible. So I'm one of those people who get up and prep, a week's meals on the weekend, even if I think I'm eating out every night, just because I know that if I'm prepared, it's all going to be easier for me down the line. I can choose not to maybe follow through with things, but at least I had that option available. So now is actually a good time to be preparing for a move to Australia. If you're sitting at home and you don't necessarily have as much time as you did to be, running around with all those other things that life would normally fill your day with, you can focus on putting your application together, getting prepared, and then making that move to Australia as you'd always planned to.
You eat out every night?
If I can. My husband's from a family where that was a traditional thing to do, so I adopted that because it suited me.
Very good. Yeah, look, I think the message is quite clear though. I mean, the sooner you start, the better you'll be, especially in these situations where there's a cap. So let's say these 200 teachers that are being sponsored for South Australia, you want to be on the list. You want to be in that 200. You don't want to be 800th because you might be waiting 4 years. So, there are limits to the amount of people that can come into any country at any one time, or whatever country that is in the world. And so what we're experiencing, and I think this is the main point, that why it's really good to have you on this webinar today, is that COVID has suddenly put countries like Australia and New Zealand in lights. And there's a lot of people around the world that are interested in moving here. The demand is phenomenal, to be fair. And so that gives Australia a really good option to be able to say, well, we're going to control the gates here a little bit. So, our opinion and what we are basically encouraging people to do is that if you've been thinking about moving to Australia for a while, or if this is the first time, but you're really, really keen, then go now, right? Go now, because there's a wall of people behind you that want to do this, but let them be hesitant. You need to be moving forward and get ahead of that big group of people, because it is a large volume of people. And let's not forget the other stuff that Nassim was talking about, which is it takes a long time. But absolutely true what she's saying about, these universities are closing, are not open, so they're not supplying, original copies of your degree, for example. And you do that with your health certificates and all these other documents, and suddenly we're a year down the line and we still haven't lodged. So I think acting now, and acting now because policy might change as well, is really important. So that's a key message. Now, oh, there's a child.
A teenager.
Teenager. Oh yeah. So Sarah, what's the next step? I mean, we really want to make sure that the people that are listening know whether they can do this or not. Right? So what do they have to do?
Well, the biggest thing is they need to get their skills assessed. So Australia, the first step in any migration plan is to get a skills assessment so that you can be sure that your qualification is equivalent to an Australian one. And once you've got that in place, it opens up all the doors. You can't do an application for any of these PR visas that we've been talking about without that skills assessment. And it does take time, because you do have to collect all those documents. You need pay slips and references and qualification documents and all sorts of things to be able to prove everything. So I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that more and more people are interested in migrating, but they are all in that planning phase. And if people wait until the borders are open again, then they've missed the cue. Yeah. You want to start now so that you get that planning phase and that assessment phase done, and you find out, yes, I can do this, and get that application in and jump the queue before everyone goes, okay, they're open again, let's go.
Yeah. Okay, so look, we've only got about 6 minutes to go. On this skill assessment, I know kind of time flies, but this skill assessment, that's a mandatory part of the process, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, and in order to get the skill assessment, obviously that's something that we can help people with, but normally they would have to go to a specific accreditation body. How does that work? Can you explain that a little bit more detail?
Sorry, every profession has its own accreditation body that's been chosen by the government as the body to look after that skill. So some of the bigger ones look after lots of them, such as like trade ones are all handled by a similar body. But your psychologists have a specific one, and engineers have a specific, and computer have a specific. So we've helped so many people through that process that we know each of the requirements across the board. So are really good at telling you exactly what you need and pulling it together, rather than you trying to ferret through the requirements and work it all through. There's so much documentation. You can have hundreds of pages going in for an assessment. It depends on your work history, obviously. If you've had one employer, it's a lot easier.
So Nassim, you're nodding and smiling. What's your opinion on that?
So there's been quite a few people over the years that we've obviously assisted with the skills assessments. Sarah was just talking about how she can help. She's, got all that experience and has helped people. We've got a client at the moment who, for the last 3 years, had been telling us that he would sort out his own skills assessment. And every year would roll by. Sarah's laughing. She knows what I'm talking about. He wouldn't have had it done. He's like, no, I'm going to do it myself, and then I'll let you guys take over from the next step. It took Sarah, once he formally agreed to let us just manage it and sort it out, to get it over the line, including stage 1 and 2, because it was a trades role, just a couple of months. And last week she lodged his PR application. But I think it just goes to show that those who know what they're doing can move things along a lot faster. Because we've got the experience, we know what needs to be done and what you should focus on and not worry about. So yeah, there was still a lot of paperwork, but it really just meant that he needed someone to help him through that process, because, you know, life gets in the way, and everything else will always be like, oh, I'll just do what's easier, which is just ignore it and just do my day-to-day life, but that doesn't help with your end goal of actually migrating to Australia.
No. And look, I think, Nassim, what you're saying there, the skill assessment is the sort of the first mountain, isn't it? It's the biggest mountain to climb in terms of this whole process, but it's the first part. So we don't want people to be concerned. I guess the most amount of work is at the very beginning. Once you've got that skill assessment done and you're able to prove to the government that your skill assessment has been approved and it is the equivalent of an Australian qualification, then I wouldn't say it's plain sailing from there, but it's going to be a lot easier, correct?
Yeah, well, at least then you're on your way.
You're on your way.
Just rung on the ladder. Without it, you know, depending on how big the gaps between the rungs are, you can't jump to the next one. Like, it's a mandatory requirement. So once you've done that, at least you know that you're one step closer. But I'd actually like to suggest that there's something that you need to do even before the skills assessment, and that's actually talk to someone who knows immigration policy and regulations and knows the legislation and can actually assess and determine whether this is for you. So we talked about the example of the teachers. The Australian government has not just like 1 or 2 definitions of teachers. There's multiple versions of teachers. You might be a dance teacher, a special needs teacher, a primary school teacher, a secondary school teacher. And each of these has a different criteria, and each of these is on a different list. So you actually need to talk to someone who can assess and determine what your immigration pathway is going to be, so they can then help you get to that first mountain, which is the skills assessment. So I just think that's also really, really important to know. Like, I can see questions about how I'm a this or I'm a that. You know, we can assess people and work out whether or not that, you know, migrating to Australia is for them based on their specific, you know, specializations.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do and that we encourage everybody who's thinking about moving to Australia is to work with us at the first stage. And what we do is an eligibility assessment. So basically you engage with us for £250, that's sterling, UK, £250. And Nassim or Sarah or one of their team fully assess you to understand whether you actually can migrate, whether you do qualify. And honestly, this is the best thing that you can possibly do, because if you can't migrate, at least you know, you can stop the dream and look at something else. If you can't currently migrate, but there's options for you in the future, we'll explain what those options are. Maybe you need a few more, you know, years experience, or maybe you need some more qualification points, but at least you'll know, hey, there is a pathway if I do these things. And the third thing is that they'll tell you, hey, yeah, you can qualify. You, given the information that you've provided us, we believe that you will be able to obtain a 189 visa. And that just opens up your whole world, because suddenly you're saying, hey, I actually do have the ability to migrate. And so this is a really good thing, because A, it's not a lot of money in the big scheme of things, and B, it gives you certainty before you go out and spend a whole lot of money and time thinking that you can when you can't. So we will be having a workshop after this. We haven't quite set the date, but we'll be sending some communication, and we'll be answering your Q&As on this. I'm kind of wary that we're running out of time. But the next step from here that we would be recommending is engaging with Nassim and or Sarah just to do the eligibility and go, hey, look, can I do this? And what we see with people who do that is that suddenly their whole world changes, because they've got this knowledge about where they can go in life. And it's quite amazing. It's quite liberating. So that's our recommendation. And we can talk about that more. It is only half an hour, this webinar. We don't like to soak up too much time, short amounts of information, but we will be having a workshop again for those people who want to come to the next level and learn more detail. So I am having to wrap up rather quickly. There's always stuff to talk about, so sorry about this. But anyway, I'm going to bid you all farewell, and Sarah and Nassim, if you can do the same, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
I hope we get to work with some of you. It's always great to meet new people, new migrants.
Yeah, just echoing what Sarah said. Looking forward to being able to meet all of you either through email or Zoom or whatever it might be one day in Australia. Cheers.
Okay, goodbye everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.